He mocked me in front of everyone, switching to German to say things he thought I'd never understand, but I did. Every cruel word. And when I tried to defend myself, he slapped me. The laughter stopped. Then the billionaire stood up, and what he did next silenced the entire hall. Before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this story proves one truth. You can break a person's heart, but you can't break their worth. Watch till the end to see how karma arrived dressed in power and justice. I still remember the night I got the invitation, an elegant ivory envelope with gold-pressed lettering and my name written in flawless cursive. It looked expensive. Too expensive for someone like me. Inside, there was an invitation to the annual International Business Gala at the Grand Meridian Hotel. It was signed by Mr. Adrian Wolf, the billionaire CEO of Wolf Enterprises, the same company where I worked quietly as a translator. My first instinct was to say no. People like me didn't belong in places like that. But my supervisor insisted that I attend, saying it would look good for representation. I had no idea those words were about to lead me straight into a storm. The night of the gala, I took the bus downtown, clutching the small clutch I'd borrowed from my neighbor. My dress was soft lavender, simple but elegant, the only one I could afford that felt presentable. As I entered the glittering ballroom, I felt like I had walked into another world. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above, violins played softly, and laughter rippled through the air like silk. Everyone was polished, confident, and loud, the kind of people who never had to question if they belonged. I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself I was here to work, not to fit in. That's when I first saw him. Leonard Krauss, a wealthy investor from Berlin. His smile was too perfect, his tone too smooth. At first he greeted me politely, but I could feel the condescension dripping beneath his charm. "Ah, the translator," he said with a faint smirk, looking me up and down like I was part of the decor. "Tell me, do they pay you to smile, or just to look invisible?" His companions laughed. I felt the heat rush to my face, but I smiled faintly, pretending not to understand. I had learned long ago that silence was sometimes safer than pride. But Leonard wasn't done. He switched to German, assuming I wouldn't follow. His voice was sharp, his words cruel, calling me a servant, a charity case, a pretty ornament for the poor. The guests around him chuckled, not understanding his words but laughing anyway because of his tone. Every sentence felt like a dagger cloaked in elegance. My fingers trembled as I reached for my glass of water. I understood every insult, every sneer, and yet I said nothing. I stood there, smiling softly, my heart pounding. Across the hall, I caught the faintest glimpse of Adrian Wolf. He was watching, silent, unreadable, but his eyes lingered longer than anyone else's. At that moment, I didn't know if he pitied me or was simply observing another social casualty of the rich, but what I did know, deep in my chest, was that something in his gaze felt different. It wasn't laughter, it wasn't judgment, it was focus. I just didn't realize then that his silence wasn't ignorance, it was calculation, and that the trap Leonard had set for me that night was about to snap shut on him instead. As the evening went on, I tried to fade into the background, blending among servers and staff, hoping no one else would notice me. But fate, it seemed, wasn't ready to let me disappear quietly. Leonard found me again near the buffet table, surrounded by a circle of investors. His glass of wine glinted under the chandelier as he raised it with a mock toast. "To the translator," he announced with a smirk, "the most decorative part of tonight's decor." The men around him chuckled. I could feel every gaze turning toward me, curious, entertained, cruel. My pulse thudded in my ears. I wanted to walk away, but my legs wouldn't move. Leonard switched languages effortlessly, his German flowing like poison. "Look at her," he said to his colleagues, unaware that I understood every syllable. "She probably thinks speaking a few words makes her equal. Poor girl. She should stick to serving coffee." I froze. Every word burned deeper. I had faced disrespect before. Quiet, subtle, the kind you swallow and move on from. But this was different. This was open humiliation, the kind that steals your voice before you even realize it. I could feel the laughter pressing against my skin like fire. Then something inside me broke. I didn't raise my voice or cry. I simply straightened my posture, looked him in the eye, and replied, in flawless German, "I understand everything you've said, every insult, every lie. But let me correct one thing. I don't serve coffee, Mr. Kraus. I serve meaning, something you clearly can't translate." The crowd fell silent. Leonard blinked, stunned, then laughed loudly to cover his shock. "Oh, she speaks," he said, clapping mockingly. "How adorable." He took a step closer, his face inches from mine, the smell of wine heavy on his breath. "But maybe next time you should think before speaking to your betters." Before I could step back, before anyone could react, he raised his hand and slapped me. Hard. The sound cracked through the hall like a gunshot. My glass shattered, spilling down my dress. The crowd gasped, frozen. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The sting on my cheek wasn't just from his hand, it was from every whisper, every stare, every silent bystander. I felt small, humiliated, and powerless. But then I saw something shift in the reflection of the mirrored wall behind him. Adrian Wolf rising slowly from his seat, his jaw clenched, eyes burning with a kind of anger I'd never seen before. He didn't rush toward us or shout, he simply walked, deliberate, composed, every step echoing like thunder. And in that moment, I realized the room wasn't holding its breath because of me. It was because everyone could feel it. Adrian was about to end someone's empire with words alone. The moment Adrian reached us, the air shifted, heavy, tense, and electric. The chatter in the hall died as though someone had cut the music. Leonard's smug grin faltered, and for the first time that night, he looked unsure. Adrian's expression was calm, but there was something dangerous beneath the surface, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. He turned to me first, his voice low but steady. "Miss Samantha, are you all right?" His tone carried weight, not pity, not shock, authority. I nodded faintly, still trembling. My cheek burned and my eyes blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Adrian looked at Leonard next. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, switching seamlessly into German, he said, "You seem to enjoy speaking a language you assume no one else here understands. Let's see how fluent you are in humiliation." Leonard's face paled. "Mr. Wolf, this is a misunderstanding." But Adrian cut him off sharply. "Nein," he said coldly. "The only misunderstanding here is that you thought your money excused your manners." His words rang through the marble hall. Every investor, every guest fell silent. Adrian stepped closer, his voice still even, but each sentence carried venom. "You didn't insult a waitress. You insulted the woman who built the communication bridge between my company and half of Europe, the woman who closed the very contracts that pay for the glass of wine in your hand." Murmurs rippled through the room. Leonard's hands fidgeted, his confidence crumbling. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "It was just a joke." "A joke?" Adrian's tone sharpened. "You slapped a woman and called it a joke? You mocked intelligence because you couldn't match it." He turned to the guests, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "And you all laughed. Every one of you. That's the real shame here." I stood frozen, watching as Adrian dismantled Leonard's arrogance piece by piece. His fluency in German made every word hit like a blade, elegant, precise, and final. Then, still in German, Adrian said the line that ended everything. "Respect isn't earned by wealth. It's revealed by how you treat those you think you can belittle." The hall erupted in whispers. Leonard opened his mouth to protest, but Adrian raised his hand. "Security," he said calmly. 2 guards appeared almost instantly. "Escort Mr. Kraus out of this building, and make sure he never attends another event hosted by Wolf Enterprises." As the guards approached, Leonard tried one last plea, his voice cracking with desperation. "You're overreacting." Adrian turned to him one last time, his tone now ice cold. "No, Mr. Kraus. I'm reacting appropriately. This company, and this world, has no room for men who confuse cruelty with power." The guards took Leonard by the arm and led him out. The crowd parted silently, eyes lowered, guilt heavy in the air. Adrian watched until the doors closed, then turned back to me. For the first time that night, his expression softened. "Come," he said gently. "You don't belong in this kind of chaos. Let's get you out of here." And as I walked beside him through the stunned silence of that glittering room, one thought burned through my mind. I had entered the gala invisible, but I was leaving it seen by the one man who could change everything. When the heavy doors of the ballroom closed behind us, the noise of the crowd disappeared like a fading echo. The quiet corridor outside felt almost sacred, lined with gold-framed paintings and warm light reflecting on marble floors. I tried to steady my breath, but the moment my hands stopped shaking, the tears finally came. I turned away quickly, ashamed of my weakness. Adrian didn't speak right away. He took off his suit jacket and, without a word, draped it gently over my shoulders. The warmth of the fabric caught me off guard. It smelled faintly of cedar and cologne. Calm, steady, grounding. "You don't have to be strong right now," he said softly, his voice stripped of all the power it held moments ago. "You already proved your strength in there." That broke something inside me. The room had humiliated me, mocked me, and for a few seconds I'd believed I was small again, like every moment life had told me I wasn't enough. But standing beside him now, I realized someone had actually seen me. Not as a translator, not as a background figure, but as a person. "I shouldn't have reacted," I whispered. "I should have just stayed quiet." Adrian shook his head, his tone firm but kind. "You stood your ground with dignity. That's more than most people in that hall could say." He paused, watching me carefully. "I've already asked my legal team to file an assault report. What happened tonight won't be buried under money and influence." I looked up at him, startled. "You don't have to do that." "I do," he interrupted gently, "because silence helps men like him win. You've already paid enough in humiliation. It's time he pays in consequences." His words hit harder than I expected. For years, I'd swallowed disrespect just to keep peace. But hearing him say that with such conviction made me realize how long I'd been mistaking silence for survival. We walked slowly toward the exit, our footsteps echoing in sync. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the scent of rain. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he broke the silence, his tone softer now. "You know," he said, "when I watched you stand up to him, even after everything he said, I realized you have something most people in that hall don't." "What's that?" I asked quietly. "Grace," he said simply. "And grace is rare in this world." I didn't know what to say. The way he looked at me wasn't like everyone else did, not with pity or fascination, but with a kind of quiet admiration that felt dangerous, the kind that made your heart forget to protect itself. He turned toward the curb as his car pulled up, sleek, black, and spotless under the streetlight. He opened the door and said softly, "Let me take you home." I hesitated for a moment, torn between pride and exhaustion, but when his eyes met mine, calm, steady, and sincere, I nodded. That night, as the city lights blurred past the car window, I realized something. The man who had humiliated me showed the world what cruelty looked like. But Adrian Wolfe, he showed me what power could look like when wrapped in kindness. And in that quiet drive home, beneath the hum of the city, a spark of something unspoken began to rise between us. Something that felt like trust. Maybe even the beginning of something deeper. A few days later, the world began to whisper. What had started as a private humiliation inside the Grand Meridian soon turned into public outrage. My phone buzzed with messages I hadn't expected, colleagues checking in, journalists asking for statements, and strangers thanking me for standing up to a man like Leonard Krauss. But I stayed quiet. I didn't want fame. I wanted dignity. And that, Adrian promised, was exactly what I'd get. He called me into his office one morning. The city skyline stretched behind him, sunlight spilling through glass walls. He looked composed, but I could tell by the sharp focus in his eyes that something big was about to happen. "Are you ready?" he asked. "For what?" I asked, unsure. "For justice," he replied simply. That afternoon, Wolf Enterprises held a press conference. Cameras, reporters, flashing lights, all of it felt surreal. I stood behind the podium as Adrian addressed the media in his calm, commanding tone. "An incident occurred at our recent gala," he began, "one that revealed how cruelty hides behind wealth and ignorance." His gaze swept across the room. "Our employee, Miss Samantha Hayes, was publicly assaulted and humiliated, and unlike others, we won't stay silent." He gestured to the screen behind him. Footage appeared. Someone had recorded the exact moment Leonard slapped me. Gasps filled the room. The video showed everything: his smirk, my shock, and Adrian stepping in to end it. The media erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes burst like lightning. Adrian raised a hand, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Kraus will face legal consequences. Our contracts with his firm have been terminated, effective immediately." The headlines spread within hours. Investor exposed at Wolf Gala. Billionaire CEO defends employee with fierce speech. Translator turned hero. Samantha Hayes becomes symbol of courage. I sat in my apartment that night, watching it all unfold on the news, my heart pounding with disbelief. The world that once mocked me was now listening. But what touched me most wasn't the attention. It was Adrian's message at the end of the conference. He had looked directly into the cameras and said, "Power means nothing if you can't use it to protect someone who doesn't have it." That single line spread everywhere, on social media, in news articles, in hearts. Leonard lost everything within days. His investors pulled out, his reputation crumbled, and his arrogance finally met its consequence. I didn't feel joy watching it happen, just a quiet peace. The next morning, Adrian called me into his office again, but this time there was no press, no cameras, just the two of us. "You're not just a translator anymore," he said. "You're now the Director of International Relations. You've earned it, not out of sympathy, but because you've proven what integrity looks like under fire." I stood there speechless. All I could whisper was, "Thank you." He smiled faintly. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself for never letting them destroy your voice." As I left his office, the city below shimmered with life. I realized revenge hadn't come through anger, it had come through truth, and sometimes truth is the loudest form of revenge there is. Months passed, but the echoes of that night never truly left me. What had begun as a moment of humiliation had transformed into something I could never have imagined: respect, purpose, and an entirely new chapter of my life. The whispers that once mocked me now spoke my name with admiration. "Samantha Hayes," they called me. "The woman who silenced arrogance with grace." It still felt unreal sometimes. My role at Wolf Enterprises grew faster than I could keep up with. I wasn't just translating meetings anymore, I was leading them. Every new deal, every handshake reminded me how far I'd come, and how one act of cruelty had unintentionally pushed me toward my strength. Adrian and I worked closely, side by side. What started as quiet gratitude slowly turned into a bond that was deeper than either of us could explain. He had always carried himself like a man built from control, calculated, precise, rarely letting emotion show. But with me, he changed. His tone softened, his glances lingered, and sometimes in the middle of a long meeting, I'd catch him looking at me as if he'd just remembered what humanity felt like. And though neither of us spoke about it, the air between us carried a language all its own. Then, one evening, everything came full circle. The company hosted another international gala, this time to celebrate a major partnership. As I stood backstage, ready to give the opening speech, I felt my heart racing. I was no longer the invisible girl in a lavender dress. I was now the keynote speaker, standing before the same type of crowd that had once laughed at me. When my name was announced, the hall erupted in applause. The lights shimmered off crystal chandeliers, and I walked to the podium with steady steps. My voice didn't tremble. I began my speech in German, the very language once used to humiliate me. "Respect," I said, my voice carrying through the hall, "isn't earned by wealth or words. It's revealed by how we treat others when we think no one is watching. Silence. Then applause. Not polite, but powerful. It rose and swelled until it filled the entire ballroom. I saw faces light up with realization, even guilt. But one face stood out. Adrian's. He was standing at the edge of the stage, pride gleaming in his eyes. When the event ended, he found me by the balcony overlooking the city. The night breeze carried the faint sound of music, and the golden skyline stretched endlessly before us. For a while, we didn't speak. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "You know, that speech. You didn't just teach them respect." I turned toward him. "What did I teach them then?" His lips curved into a faint smile. "You taught them what grace looks like when it refuses to bow. And maybe..." He paused, his voice lower now. "You taught me what love really means." The words hung in the air between us, fragile and perfect. I didn't answer, I just smiled, because some things don't need translation. As we stood there, city lights shimmering below and memories fading into peace, I realized my story wasn't one of revenge anymore. It was one of redemption, the kind that turns pain into power, humiliation into strength, and silence into voice. And if anyone ever asked me what I learned from it all, I'd simply say, grace speaks every language. You just have to listen. If Samantha's courage moved you, hit like, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more tales where justice speaks louder than cruelty. Because in the end, kindness isn't weakness, it's the loudest form of strength.